All right, since our panelists are all here for the first session, I think we'll get started just a couple minutes early. So our first session is going to be exploring new healthcare protections for evolving cybersecurity attacks. And moderating this session is Chad Holmes, security evangelist at Scenario. From call center software to military logistics systems, he has 20 years of experience creating, breaking, securing a variety of technologies while helping others learn to do the same. At Scenario, he helps educate healthcare providers on the threats introduced by IoT, OT, and medical IoT devices throughout their organizations, looking at real-life incidents, attacker motives, remediation and mitigation techniques, how to balance risk with functionality, and achievable approaches to improve cybersecurity. Joining Chad is Daniel Brody, CTO and co-founder of Scenario, a technologist known for his expertise in application and operating system security and vulnerability discovery. His experience in Israel's Unit 8200 cyber technology division, coupled with private industry leadership roles, have provided him with a balanced approach that enables rapid product development while ensuring deliverables. He is a technical driver behind the company's healthcare-focused technology, including the network detection and response product, which continues to evolve due to a combination of increasing attacks, innovation research feedback loops, and effective oversight of R&D teams. And rounding out the panel is Dr. Rasu Shrestha, Chief Innovation and Commercialization Officer at Advocate Health. He has 30 years of industry experience as a transformative physician leader known for delivering results across strategy, innovation, health IT, marketing, communications, strategic investments, and commercialization. He joined Advocate Health as part of Atrium Health in January 2019, leading the strategic transformation of the organization, and was charged with the creation and implementation of Impact 2025, a multi-year strategic plan focused on key priorities, including operational excellence, the path to value, environmental sustainability, innovations and partnerships and growth, integrated scale, and influence. Chad, Daniel, Rasu, welcome. And Chad, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You are all on camera, and I will go on mute.
Great. Thank you, Carol. And Carol, if we knew you were going to read all our bios, we would have made them much, much shorter. So thank you for doing that. But I'm lucky to have two very distinguished people with very good bios here with us today. Also, Dr. Demuth, great presentation. I'm going to quote you probably half a dozen times as we go through. So thank you for giving that. I think you did a really good job setting us up for a successful session. And of course, everyone, thank you for joining us today. So what we're going to talk a little bit today is the emerging protections we're seeing in the healthcare space. We're starting to see that the protections that healthcare traditionally relies on are not sufficient. They're absolutely necessary, but they're not sufficient to address the evolving attacks we're seeing. But in order to do that, we wanted to define the problem a little bit more. I think the opening session did a great job with that, but there's always a little bit more we can go there. So we're going to jump right in here. If you have questions, feel free to email me at chad.holmes@scenario.com. Probably won't be able to get them to them during the session, but we'll absolutely make sure to follow up. That said, jumping right in, I want to start with you, Rasu. As you're going through and you're helping drive organizational change, not just at Atrium, but with your peers, one of the biggest struggles there is actually discussing what the cybersecurity posture of not only their environments are, but the entire nation are, right? We're firmly under attack. So as you're having those discussions, what anecdotes, what data points, what do you find is most convincing and helping to define the problem and influence change?
Well, thank you, Chad, and it's a real pleasure to be here today, that's for sure. Facts speak louder than fear. And when it comes to cybersecurity, the facts are pretty loud and clear, right? The one consistent topic that is almost in every boardroom across healthcare and beyond is cybersecurity and the state of what's actually happening, especially in healthcare. And it's not getting better. I think it's actually getting worse. And again, the facts and the data speaks for itself. 2023 was perhaps the worst year ever for cyber attacks aimed at healthcare organizations. The number of attacks isn't necessarily higher than past years, but the attacks have been more damaging and has affected more people. About 106 million individuals have been affected by cyber attacks involving healthcare organizations. And it's not getting better. It's actually getting worse, as I was saying. So for perspective, about 44 million people were affected by breaches in health information in 2022. So the number of individuals affected in 23 has more than doubled. So put it another way, 1 in 3 Americans have been affected by a health data breach in 2023. So there's definitely a lot of facts out there to really open our eyes, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion today.
Yeah, and I wish for me personally that was just a nebulous number of someone else. My home hospital, Anna Jakes in Newburyport, Mass, got hit on Christmas Eve. They lost 600 gigs of data. So I think there's 3 of us presenting. 1 in 3 got hit recently, and I think it's a perfect example. Daniel, I'm going to throw it over to you. Right, you're deep in the weeds. You're working on not only innovating technologies, but actually seeing the attacks and stopping them. As you have to bundle those up into some very concise messaging, what stats, anecdotes, or stories do you see really hit home with customers and others in the industry?
So a good one that we see from a number that's not coming from us, it's coming from a third-party source from FBI, which is talking about over 50%, I think it's about 53% of devices that had critical risk problems, issues on those devices. And that's just one aspect of cybersecurity that we are seeing hospitals having to deal with. Another aspect that we're seeing with our own customers is near 50% of customers that are impacted by a security incident of one kind or another and have to deal with it, and also the challenges with which they have to deal with while dealing with those incidents. So that allows us to kind of see that what we're seeing is not very different than, as Razu shared, what we're seeing outside in the wild.
And so let's stick with the technology there, because the stat you quote is interesting, because it is 53% of devices have a critical issue. The FBI reports on that. It does come from our research, so we're very proud of that. But the fact that the FBI puts that out there shows how well vetted that is. There are thousands of devices. A lot of attacks are coming in through email, right? Phishing scams. So can you talk a little bit about the why these attacks are happening? Why have we invested so much and have started to see spikes over the last decade or so? And Daniel, I'll start with you on the tech side.
So I think at the end of the day, a lot of threat actors operate similar to businesses, right? They try to get the most value for the least amount of effort. So they, as they get into an organization that is vulnerable for all kinds of the technological reasons of where the potential risks are in the organization, they will end up hitting the places that end up being the easiest place for them to hit to get the most cost for value. Windows XP devices, for example, which are quite a few, or Windows 7, unsupported Windows 7 devices, which are, again, quite a few on healthcare networks, tend to be one of the weakest underbelly of healthcare organizations. Healthcare organizations which have quite a lot of patient data that is very valuable on the black market. Our ability to shut down an organization for ransomware purposes was, again, it's very valuable. So it just kind of the cost of the amount of effort versus the value that they get, that multiplication ends up being very high.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this hard outer shell that they've invested a lot in, but if you just find one little weakness, there's a whole atmosphere behind there that's wide open for attack, and that's what we're seeing. And so with that mindset, Razu, it's not for lack of trying, right? There's a lot of spend, there's a lot of effort going into securing healthcare, but it's not just sufficient. So from the organizational level, why is this happening? Why are we where we are? And how do we start changing how we better protect our environments?
Yeah, the why is, I think, a really important construct here. I'm glad that you're honing in on that, Chad. First and foremost, it's really the vast amounts of information that's being held by health services, and makes for a prime target for cyber criminals. It's petabytes worth of data across the board. It's a very tempting target, also because you can directly put lives at risk. Right. So it's not just the vulnerabilities in the system, it's the vulnerabilities in the human elements of how this magnitude of any vulnerability when exploited can actually affect lives at the other end. The other piece here in terms of the why are sort of the legacy elements of healthcare, right? So old health IT systems make it really easier for criminals to get after some of those vulnerabilities. Legacy systems can account for sometimes 30 to 50% of all IT services, and It's a dire number when you think about healthcare, but that's the construct of healthcare. And some of these systems were designed more than 20 years ago. And as Daniel was saying as well, those vulnerabilities are ripe for exploiting. So there's definitely a lot out there, but there's also the value of the data, right? So medical records are harder to detect, and when you look at all the different types of whether it's identity theft or different ways to obtain medical services fraudulently or other nefarious purposes behind which the medical data can be exploited. There is a lot of value that these cyber criminals find in medical data. And then last but not least is health systems, whether it's provider organizations or payers, even pharma. When you think about large networks, we're heavily reliant on our data and networked systems to provide care, right? It's a network of networks. And that just inherently in the architecture of how we're networked provides a level of exposure that must be mitigated with some of the capabilities that we're diving deeper into today.
And so I've got to follow up on that with you, Rizu, a little bit. So first of all, you mentioned, and Dr. Damath mentioned beforehand, there are impacts on patient care, but it's not directly where kind of our worst fear, which is someone goes and hacks an IV pump and overdoses us. The reality is it's more about deferred care or delayed care. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. It is. It absolutely is. And when you think about different types of care that we're providing across the board, including in the ICUs, in the emergency departments, in the radiology departments, the PCP offices, but also increasingly so, care is shifting from the bricks and mortar facilities into patients' homes, right? So we're moving from episodic care that happens maybe once a year or a couple of times a year to always on ubiquitous 24/7 care. So when you think about then the digital exhaust that comes out of patients and consumers increasingly, the opportunities for the exploitation of the various elements of that is massively increased today than ever before.
Yeah, and I want to stay with you for one quick question, then I'm going to have Daniel dive deeper into this. But you use the term, it's a network of networks, right? So all the hospitals are interconnected, all the doctors' offices are interconnected. So the question has to become, the devices we're putting online, thousands of devices in most environments, is there more value in them being online, even though they've introduced risk, or should they be taken offline? What's your opinion there?
Well, look, we're putting these devices online not for them to get hacked, but so that we can actually save patients' lives, right? And that level of interoperability around data and these devices actually has an effect in saving patients' life and in the care coordination that's required around that N of one or the N of many when we're talking about population health versus precision health. So, it is how we do business in healthcare. It is how we provide health and care in this industry that we're in right now. So really, the onus is on us, experts like you and Daniel and others, to make sure that you're working with health systems and providers like us to really protect these network of networks, these devices, and the data that we're really trying to put to actionable use to save patients' lives.
Yeah, and the way my mind works, I always like to fall back on the numbers whenever I can. So it's somewhere between 10 and 20% of hospitals suffer an attack of some sort in the US each year. So the reality is that 1 or 2 days of attack or a couple months in some worst cases, you're still getting overwhelming benefit from these devices. So yes, there's a reason to be afraid. Yes, we have to secure them, but it's not a complete shutdown of the US healthcare system yet. So Daniel, I want to play on the network of networks a little bit, and I want you to explore, what do healthcare networks really look like? If just one phishing attack gets in and it spreads rapidly, why does it spread? What makes networks so insecure that hackers are targeting healthcare over other critical infrastructure industries?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad. So I think healthcare, healthcare tech, and their networks that support them are kind of in a combination of being in a place where, as you said, we're pushing more and more connectivity to allow to improve our ability to deliver care to the patients. At the same time, the infrastructure, network infrastructure, security infrastructure has not been pushed at the same time as that connectivity has been pushed. And lastly, unlike certain OT environments, right, industrial kind of factory, stuff like that, the complexity is very high. It's not something you can say, okay, we'll take this piece that is very sensitive and we'll just block it off from the rest of the world. No, it is very connected because of that network of network effects, because you want that data to be coming into your EMRs, and you want that to be shared across doctors, and you want it to be able to go to your virtual radiology services and the radiologist who's sitting at home. And you need that connectivity to allow us to deliver that care at the rate that we want to be delivering it, and with the connectivity improvements that the connectivity provides. So we're kind of in that the overlap between those three pieces. And that brings us to the place where you have a very connected network, which with a lot of very sensitive data, EPHI and patient data, with not enough security infrastructure in place. And as you mentioned, Chad, a very hard security exterior with very specific non-healthcare focused tools that leave a huge gap in kind of the rest of the network, and not enough segmentation or internal firewalling or other kind of security layers, right? The message is always saying that security, like an onion, you have to have multiple layers. So not enough of those pieces in the healthcare environment as that connected piece is growing and growing.
And security is also like an onion in that it'll make you cry sometimes, but we can deal with that another time. So we've talked a lot about the bad stuff. And if anyone wants even more bad news or bad stats, reach out. I'm more than happy to give you more bad news. But let's actually start focusing on what we can start to do to better protect our environments. And Razul, I want to start with you. Let's talk about money and resources first, right? We're already investing huge amounts of money in securing our environments, necessary but not sufficient, as I talked about. So as you're working to define what a budget should look like, how you get more skilled people, what are the key factors that you're looking at there? And then do you have any rules of thumb or guidance when it comes to the fiscal discussions around securing healthcare?
No, I think that's a really important construct here, and especially for not-for-profit health systems. Every dollar counts, right? And it's not easy providing the services that we're providing, especially at scale across vast geographies. But also at the same time, it's those vulnerabilities that we're talking about that really go into those budgetary considerations. And we're right in the middle of budget season, as are a lot of other health systems as well. And the one question that I ask my peers and executives across not just our health system, but across the board as I interact with others as well, is what is the price you're willing to pay for peace of mind? And I think that's really important. The ROI on peace of mind is one to think about. Good news is that it doesn't have to really break the bank, right? Indeed, it can actually be quite the opposite, with proactive technological advancements that are available out there that also embrace more of a platform approach as opposed to a point solution type of an approach. The protections that we're getting and the incidents that we're actually avoiding can actually save you financially, and more so operationally and reputationally so as well. So there are different ways to really look at the value of these investments that we need to proactively be making and factoring into our budgets. Everything from peace of mind to the specifics of what is it that we're actually saving financially, operationally, and reputationally as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have horror stories of the big numbers that if anyone wants to see them in the case studies, I can certainly go into it. But the reality is these breaches cost a lot of money. Daniel, sticking with the resource side of thing, it's not just about the outlay for the products themselves. There's other resources we have to think about. There's actually people, there's training, there's getting the technology up and running. Increasingly, there's cloud consumption, things like that. When you're working with our customers and others in the industry, are you finding that most of them are trying to save money by going in-house? Are they offloading some of that work to third parties, or is it a combination?
I think it's a combination. It kind of depends where the organization is on their own maturity scale, not necessarily the size, but the kind of where they are from their own security scale. Like you mentioned, most of the work is not in buying the product, right? A lot of organizations buy a product and it sits on the side, collecting dust for many years to come, and that's a very common problem in cybersecurity, especially in more complicated to implement cybersecurity. I think where we see it is, as you mentioned, is being able to build the proper governance, being able to build the proper ownership, being able the processes, the procedures. How do you measure that? How do you show to the board over time success in the project? And then how do you get the right teams in the organization, especially healthcare, where there is for a lot of things not a single point of ownership, but multiple owners, right? How do you get that across? And the more mature the organization the more mature the clear delineations of ownership is it's easier to kind of do that in-house. When the organization doesn't have that governance, that processes and the procedures in place, it's a lot of times easier to bring somebody external and have them be able to move along the organization to bring them to the place where they have uh, implemented the right pieces that they need to allow them to get the value they need, mostly from their people, from their training, and help them setting up the tools that they need to help support these processes and KPI that they try to achieve.
Yeah, and I'm personally seeing that MSSPs, managed security service providers, are doing a great job finding ways to remotely serve hospitals all over the world. Sometimes they have boots on the ground, but more often than not, it's digital boots on the ground. And the individual organizations are getting better, more skilled people than they could necessarily find themselves, and often at a lower rate. So there's always a balance there. To one comment in the chat, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but we are starting to see there are services that are helping secure the broader community than not. I do want to focus on a little bit what trends are coming out. And I'll skip past the vendors are charlatans comment from earlier on. Not all of us are, just some of us. But ultimately, we're starting to see a lot of trends. I don't want to dive too much into Gen AI because Zscaler is going to do a whole great session on that after this. But what other trends are we seeing? So Daniel, I want to start with you on the technical side. What trends do you see that are helping us better secure healthcare environments and either prevent attacks or more likely identify attacks quickly and then stop them in their tracks?
So I think there's a growing understanding of a need for more healthcare focused solutions, or solutions that have the ability to be tailor-made or tailor-focused for healthcare organizations. That's coming in, kind of what you mentioned, Chad, of MSPs or MSSPs coming in with taking tools and kind of helping tailor them and build the shell around them to make sure that they're actually usable and helpful in a healthcare environment. It comes with some more of the generic tools having their own healthcare specific vertical or side of their solution to kind of help organizations make sure that they're not just taking a generic solution, dumping it on their network and hoping for the best, which is sadly very common, or just deploying a generic solution and have hoping that out of the box it'll just work in healthcare organizations. And lastly, there's a growing number of healthcare specific cybersecurity companies, such as ourselves, obviously, but there's quite a few, and the market is growing. And I think that trend and the ability of those companies to kind of work with the organization helps drive for the unique needs of healthcare. Otherwise, like I mentioned, a lot of times these solutions just end up missing a nice chunk of what the actual problem is that healthcare needs.
Yeah, that's interesting because Razu, I'm sure you've seen every pitch in the book at least twice over, right? So as you're going through, as you're starting to see all these trends, all these technologies being presented, how do you filter out those that are just throwing stuff against the wall to see if it sticks versus those that can actually go in and address the specific needs of healthcare? What's your process there? How would you guide others?
Yeah, we're pretty diligent about how it is that we evaluate these solutions that, like you said, are often thrown at us. And we follow the data, we follow evidence, and we follow the advancements that are actually being made from a technological perspective, right? The bad guys have figured it out. It's not the number of attacks, it's where you attack, right? So when you look at things from an end-to-end perspective, whether it's smaller to medium-sized health systems or larger ones like HCA, for example, the nation's largest for-profit system that suffered a theft of health data affecting as many as, I think it was 11 million patients and last year, it is really across the board. So I think it's really important for us to have these more proactive solutions that really focus in on more of a platform approach, right? And leverage those capabilities to look at everything from malware to remote monitoring and management, or RMM, to efforts such as phishing and social engineering as well, right? So you got to really look at things from across the board and have much more of a proactive approach to how it is that we're managing, the plethora of threats across the board. You mentioned Gen AI earlier as well. I think there's a lot of opportunities with Gen AI, and I'm really excited about everything that Scenario is bringing to the table from a Gen AI perspective and leading that charge. I think artificial intelligence is widely projected to really change healthcare in multiple different ways. I'm a radiologist, and it's already changing the way that radiology and healthcare in many ways is being practiced. But from a cybersecurity perspective, the opportunity for AI to really help scan networks quickly, identify vulnerabilities across vast networks of networks, as we were talking about just now, and perhaps even accelerate our ability to do that, and perhaps accelerate our ability to apply patches at scale in a much more proactive way. It's this AI-fueled cyber arms race that we're right in the midst of right now, and I'd much rather bank on a horse that has the expertise to leverage these capabilities than not.
Yeah, it's a great point. And Daniel, I'm going to ask you about Gen AI since Razu brought it up, and we can't just avoid that. I know you and I have done a fat or fabulous webinar about it. Is it great? Is it nothing? Is it somewhere in between? What are you seeing in terms of Gen AI specifically helping healthcare? Where are their benefits, and where can we maybe pass on it?
So I think there's two sides to that, and that also goes to who's point. But first of all, there's the back-end side, right? Kind of how it's being used more and more. And I think, well, let's take a half a step back. First of all, I think Gen AI is already being used by attackers at the end of the day. Attackers have already realized that Gen AI is a great tool to be used to, even from email, right? To kind of allow them to create a massive attack with email, of thing which would be easier to bypass, spam filters or phishing detectors and things like that, whether it's being able to attack a network and kind of go about it in a way where it's not as easy to find when somebody's scanning the network, right? So in the same way that attackers are using it, it is our responsibility as cybersecurity companies, vendors, experts, whichever side of the piece you take, to see how we can leverage that technology to better detect attacks, and so we can be as much as possible one step ahead of the attackers. And that's already something that quite a few cybersecurity organizations are looking at ourselves as well. How do we leverage those technologies into helping us be more accurate in our risk detection, more accurate in our device detection, more accurate in our attack detection, and kind of providing that in a way that's easier. But there's the other side of that, and that's also in a more healthcare specific way, is how do we take all that amount of information that we have, which is one of the biggest problems, right? Cybersecurity, we have a huge amount of data. How do we take that, prioritize, condense it, and give it to our customers, to give it to the severely lacking security teams, which have not enough people, not enough training, and not enough resources, in a way where it's actionable and they can know what they actually need to do and when and how critical it is. And that's, I think, where really Gen AI is going to be the force multiplier for healthcare, because being able to connect to all these different solutions, being able to connect to all that different data, and really give a bottom line and helping to move that needle without requiring as much amount of training in the future.
And Daniel, I want to stick with you, and I'm going to again quote Dr. Demuth. He said that we're in the bloodletting days of cybersecurity, right? We're going out there and seeing what we can do, and we really need to focus on more evidence-based healthcare cybersecurity, and that's important because both evidence-based and specifically to the needs of healthcare. And you have a couple cycles on this going, whether it's identifying devices automatically, finding where they need patch levels, microsegmentation rules, or stopping things like hospital robots from going in, pushing a button, and being controlled from halfway around the world. We have a great case study if anyone wants to read that. But at the end of the day, because you have all this data you mentioned, it's actually informing product growth. It's not guessing at what the market needs and then developing and hope it hits. It's actually informed development. So can you talk a little bit about what that feedback loop looks like and how it accelerates, or if it does accelerate, product development?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the benefits we have by being already widely deployed across a number of healthcare organizations is that we can have people from our cybersecurity analyst team. We call it Scenario Live. They're some of the best trained cybersecurity healthcare specific analysts that you can find, and they can have a harebrained idea, kind of work with a customer when there's a new vulnerability or a new thing that they want to try out, and we can very quickly work around and see if that is something that customers find interesting, if customers find value with, and then move on from there. And that kind of cycle allows us to really move forward in terms of the value and features that we want to add to our product looking forward. We've done a significant push, and we're doing a significant push this year around data security. And that came out with working with quite a few customers around their information systems on their network and finding severe vulnerabilities in that piece and trying to figure out how do they approach them, how they responded to it. And that's pushing ahead one of our new initiatives that we're doing this year. One of the previous initiatives that we did before that around detecting attacks as well was working with customers very closely when they had attacks and helping them resolve those attacks and taking those insights and literally translating them into features in our products. And we're really trying to get that process of just having the processes that organizations are doing or should be doing, and just having that be the process in our solution. And that's been very helpful for us to kind of help organizations working together, really working it as a partnership, right? So we have these customers that are really partnerships with us and kind of helping them move along, and they help our product move along. And it's kind of a hand-holding process.
And I don't think you realize you did it, but you just announced a product live that we haven't officially announced. So you're the co-founder, you're allowed to do that. But effectively, we've been doing about 1.5 years of research on identifying exposed EPHI environments, and we've gotten the product to a point where we can actually go live with it. So we'll be announcing that shortly, but if anyone's interested in getting in early on that, again, shoot me an email, chad.holmes@scenario.com. Razu, I have to correct you on a minor thing that you said very early in the intro. I think it'll be a good correction though. So you said 106 million records were actually exposed last year, making it all-time high. It's actually 118. The final records came up, so it's 12 million more, which I think the best thing you said there, though, was it's 1/3 of people in the States have had their records exposed. And so it has to go to the question of, can hospitals be relied to secure this themselves? Or are there regulatory trends, government funding, things that are in the bigger atmosphere than just the individual locations? How are those changing the environment, and what are you seeing there?
Yeah, Chad, and appreciate the correction, and exactly right. And that's the reason I put that estimate out there. And what's really interesting is that a lot of health systems and entities that do get hacked or breached, et cetera, oftentimes the reporting lags behind. So there's always a catching up of those numbers as well. And as far as your question is concerned, look, it's really important for health systems to rely on the right set of partners to really get this right. It is not easy. We're in the business of providing health and care to our patients and the most vulnerable parts of our communities. So let's depend on those experts, and that's part of the reason why we do the things that we do with companies like Scenario. And then from a regulatory perspective, it is encouraging to see some of the progress that that is being made. The national cybersecurity strategy that President Biden released last year, focusing specifically on strengthening resilience for hospitals, patients, and communities threatened by cyber attacks. I think it is multiple steps in the right direction. When you think about entities like ASPR, the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Responses, that coordinate a bunch of things across ARPA-H and ONC and CMS and ONC and others, other three-letter acronyms across the board. There is a push for more proactiveness, right, and more of an organized approach to do things the right way. So the one thing that I always talk about as it relates to partnering right and making sure that we have the right approach is do more on offense than even defense. And I think that's really important. Hospitals and health systems need to make cybersecurity a high priority, in fact, the highest priority. And leaders generally understand the risks. And then one thing I always say is complacency is your worst enemy, right? Just because you haven't been attacked for a while doesn't mean that you're not going to get attacked. And we know the reality. Every day we're fending off attacks left, right, and center. And so complacency really is your worst enemy, and it's really important for us to do more on offense than even on defense.
Yeah, and we're seeing not protections, but efforts not just at the national level either, where we also have Patch Act and other efforts to not only set standards and regulatory requirements, but also fund those. And that's so critically important because we can't just keep telling healthcare, hey, do better and good luck. We have to provide a path to do that. But we're also seeing that at the state level. New York State just recently released new guidance on exactly what their hospitals have to adhere to, and that's going to change over time, but it does a great job of setting the stage for other states to copy, paste, and then edit what they're doing to help with local protections. So again, no government is ever going to solve all your problems, but they can at least help push the ball forward, which is always good. I also like that you mentioned ARPA-H. I personally really love the DigiHeals project. There's a lot of projects out there, but DigiHeals is this great effort to go and invest in innovation that goes from one industry, mostly military grade, to healthcare. Because the reality is you can't take traditional technologies and just plot them in healthcare and say, good luck, everything's secure, right? It doesn't work that way. The way you scan devices in industrial setting versus IV pumps, two very different set of issues you have to focus on. So some really good points there. I also want to point out to the crowd, we do have the chats open. So if you have questions, throw them in there. I'll do my best to get to them. Can't promise we will, but we've had a couple good ones come through that we've hit on. So what I want to hit on a little bit now is start getting really, really detailed on specific actions folks should take in the last 10 minutes or so we have here. And Daniel, I'm going to start with you. When people are looking at technologies, when they're going and saying, all right, we're going to figure out the bits and bytes, here's product X, Y, and Z we want to look at, what are the specific technologies, protections, or angles they should be looking at the lower levels?
Sorry. So I think when you're asking us around a specific technology or in terms of choosing between technologies?
Yeah. So what specific technologies should they be looking at? You know, people coming out of here today, if they have to do 2 or 3 takeaways, what would you recommend they look at?
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, it's about prioritization about what's critical in the organization, right? So there's so many different places that organizations can go in terms of buying these big tools and having specific projects. So I don't think there's an easy answer for all organizations. I think it's a question of what are the resources that you have from a person perspective, from a people perspective, from a headcount perspective, from a cost perspective, and also what are the big challenges that you see that yourself facing. For some organizations, it could be just something as simple as making sure that you have two-factor authentication set up because you don't have a lot of resources, and just that small thing could help significantly just improve that people having stolen passwords being taken away from them. I think at the end of the day, there are two main factors that need to be looked at. The first one is around being the proactive and reactive piece that Ritu mentioned first. Having something to help move forward the reactive piece so that being able to be alerted about the critical things happening in an organization, whether it's a network security solution or whether it's an identity security solution, something like that to allow you to know when what you would consider to be the highest risk type of attack in your organization so that you can be aware of it and know about it and know that you can respond. Because at the end of the day, any solution that you buy tomorrow will take you time till you implement it, till you get the government, till you get the implementation properly and the risk reduction properly. So making sure you have some reactive solution is critical. And I think the second piece is a visibility piece. I think most organizations now they're in a place where they still are not fully aware of all the risk that they have in the organization, of all the gaps that they have. And being able to go through a proper mapping of that, of having more visibility into the dark corners of the organization is critical. So those are the two factors that I think we should be focused on.
Cool. And I'm going to break those down into a couple of bullet points because you hit on some really important ones. So one is network insight to understand what's going on in your network to protect it. Next is risk prioritization. So you're not just saying, here's 10,000 alerts, good luck. You're actually prioritizing the actions. Standardization around scoring. So you're not just making things up. Having a healthcare focus, like I said, going from military to healthcare is not easy. Getting visibility in your environment, and then balancing proactive and reactive protections. So there's Daniel's 6 points on a 3-point question. Great job, Daniel. Razu, I'm going to ask you the same thing at a bit higher level. As you're working with your peers and you're saying, here are our strategic initiatives on cybersecurity, what are the 3 or 4 main points you're really focused on?
Yeah. So one of the things that really we're focusing in on is full visibility and inventory, right? If you don't see it, then you don't know that it actually exists in terms of whether it's your devices or the vulnerabilities in your network, or it's those gaps that exist across the board. So how do we automate the discovery of all of those connected devices and those networks in the networks across your systems across the board? So that visibility and inventory is, I think, really, really important. We're also looking for compliance reporting. Healthcare is difficult. We talked about some of the regulatory components that are out there as well. And whether it's around everything from J-code to DSPT, there's a lot of things from a compliance reporting perspective that we need to have in place around insights and dashboards and automated reporting. So how do we make sure that these systems that we have in place are not just providing that level of visibility and inventory, but also being a lot more proactive in making it easier for some of these compliance related things, which are there for the right protections as well. And then I mentioned this briefly earlier, but taking more of a proactive platform-based approach, we think is really important as well, right? So having the right protections in place end to end, making sure that you're managing proactively those incidents before, if possible, they even happen, but also from an end-to-end perspective, making sure that you're denoising the elements of what actually exists out there, and having that more proactive approach from a platform perspective, we think is really critical as well.
Cool. And I'll go through those again for everyone. Conveniently, we at Cynario do all of those. So thank you, Razu. So first is the automation of discovery, making sure you see everything on your network. One of the real benefits of all these connected devices, even though they introduce risk, is that they're very chatty and verbose. So they're broadcasting exactly what they are all the time, and it helps with the automation of discovery and securing in a lot of cases. Next is automate or at least improving compliance reporting. So it's not just a point in time, but you can constantly see what compliance requirements you're up against. Next is taking a healthcare-focused platform approach. And then finally, you hit on it, I don't even know if you realize you did, but false positive reduction, making sure we're not giving people alert fatigue and just saying, here's all the things you have to do. So, okay, we got a couple of questions that have come in. We got 5 more minutes. So I'm going to ask you both a couple of questions from the audience. Again, keep them coming, folks. There's some good ones here. One of the things, and I'm going to editorialize this, one of the challenges from learning from a breach is that you actually have to share the experience, almost like do a post-mortem. And I want to give a great shout out to University of Vermont Medical here, where they suffered a breach a couple of years ago, and they've been incredibly open about what happened, why it happened, how they recovered, the costs, all that stuff. So Razu, the question is, are healthcare environments psychologically safe enough to learn from these breaches, or is there some damage in sharing those details?
Well, I mean, the reality is that we're not psychologically secure or safe to proactively actually go out there and willingly, share some of the information. We are, by the nature of how we, operate, really scared even to share some of the details in fear of exposing those vulnerabilities. But that is exactly what needs to be done more of, is actually come together and strengthen our respective approaches, find those faults and holes that we need to be actually addressing in a much more proactive way. And that's part of what, from a regulatory perspective, the HHS is pushing for as well, that strengthening the resilience for hospitals, as I said earlier, as well as patients and communities that are threatened by cyber attacks, and making sure that we're able to work cohesively to develop the right supports as well as the incentives for these hospitals to have more accountability, but also coordination with each other in addressing some of these opportunities as well as threats across the board.
Cool, great. And another question: which vendors are doing a good job at this? Cynario is, yay. Honestly, though, if you want a deeper dive into the vendors that are out there who just asked that question, reach out to me. I'll be happy to send some reports. Daniel, we have a couple minutes left. So can you talk a little bit about the safety of Gen AI, right? Everyone is really, really excited about Gen AI, but there could be errors that introduce risk. So I want you to talk more specifically about our uses and how you're making sure that the way we use it will not introduce any risk into the healthcare environments.
I think that's a great question. I think at the end of the day, AI is a tool, just like any other tool, right? It's not like we haven't had other tools that detected anomalies, that detected things misbehaving. Gen AI used in a very wide way, which is kind of the popular way where it's right, the ChatGPTs or of the world are being used in a very wide and untailored way, and that's something that is definitely something that should be examined, right, from a perspective of the gen side of the AI, the generative of creating content rather than just finding things. I do think there are, first of all, new technologies that are Gen AI based, that are more internalized, more local. LLMs, as an example, is something that's becoming more and more common, more popular, and one of the things that we're working with. And when you have those more tailor-made and you're using them in a more targeted fashion, that's something that is, at the end of the day, an AI tool like any other AI tool, just more powerful and can be used in a more accurate way. Additionally, another place where it is very helpful is seeing it as something that you can use side by side to existing tools, and using metrics, which is a critical piece of any security tool, is being able to see that over time, if this is something that can be done in an accurate way or not in an accurate way. So that's kind of two ways that I think technological companies are using to verify accuracy with Gen AI.
Cool. And Daniel can go over that for about 3 or 4 hours without stopping. So thank you for the shorter version. If anyone wants to dive deeper, you're more than happy to set that up. Razu, I'm going to put you on the spot with one last question that was asked. If you had one piece of advice for regulators, what would you give them?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. I'd say it's more than one. It's perhaps a three that I'd put out there. First and foremost, embrace AI, right? Provide those guardrails and guidelines that need to be really embraced by vendors like Scenario and health systems like ours. We think that it's really important. The threats will evolve as attackers deploy new tactics. But with capabilities like AI, especially with policymakers providing the right guidelines and guardrails, we will continue to not just evolve, but we will really be much more proactive. So that's one. The second is more general, and it's not just for policymakers, but for all of us. Kill complacency. I think that's really important for us not to be complacent. And then last but not least, don't forget the human side of the equation, right? When we think about vulnerabilities, whether it's phishing or social engineering, these tried and true tactics that remain huge threats that are out there. The one vulnerability really is the human element, and so let's not forget to really address that head on, and let's use the capabilities that we have from a technological perspective, these platform type approaches that we're talking about, to really then augment and protect the human elements that are often the vulnerabilities as well.
Awesome. So just to recap, embrace AI with the right guardrails, kill complacency that's completely natural, that can't exist, and then consider the human factors there. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Thanks to all the great questions, and thanks for everyone for attending. If you do have more questions, please reach out, Cynario.com or chad.holmes@cynario.com. We have an outstanding session with Zscaler coming up, so stick around for that. It's going to be great. And with that, Carol, thank you for setting this up. Back to you.
Oh, thank you so much.